The morning sun streamed through the airport windows as 15-year-old Zara walked beside her grandmother through the busy terminal. She clutched her father's old leather messenger bag close to her chest, the same way she had every day since he passed away 3 years ago. The bag was worn and soft from years of use with tiny scuffs that told stories she would never know, but it was hers now, and it held everything that mattered to her. Gate 12 is just up ahead. Sweetheart, her grandmother said softly, adjusting her own small purse on her shoulder. Mrs. Williams had been saving for months to take Zara on this trip to Chicago. It was supposed to be special, a chance for them to visit Zara's aunt and see the city together. They rarely traveled anywhere, and flying first class was something Mrs. Williams had splurged on because she wanted to make this trip memorable. Zara nodded, running her fingers along the bag's leather strap. Inside were her journal, a few photos of her dad, his old watch that didn't work anymore, and a letter he had written to her that she kept but never opened. She'd been carrying this bag to school every day since middle school started, and the teachers never said anything about it. Why would they? It fit perfectly under her desk and held all her books just fine. As they approached the gate, Zara noticed people were already boarding. Her grandmother checked their boarding passes again, smiling when she saw they were in Group 1. "First class, can you believe it?" she whispered to Zara. "Your father would have been so proud to see you traveling like this." They got in line behind a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. In front of him stood a woman with perfectly styled hair carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than Mrs. Williams made in 2 months. Zara looked down at her dad's old bag and suddenly felt a little self-conscious. But then she remembered what her grandmother always told her. It's not what you carry that matters, it's what you carry inside. When their turn came, the gate agent smiled warmly and welcomed them aboard. Zara felt excited as they walked down the narrow hallway that led to the plane. She had only flown twice before, both times when she was little and never in first class. Her grandmother had explained that the seats would be bigger and more comfortable, and they would get real meals instead of just peanuts. As they stepped onto the plane, Zara was amazed by how spacious everything looked. The first-class section had wide leather seats that looked more like armchairs than airplane seats. A flight attendant with short brown hair and a name tag that read, Rebecca, stood near the front, directing passengers to their seats. "Welcome aboard," Rebecca said automatically, barely looking up from her clipboard. But when Zara walked past carrying her father's bag, Rebecca's expression changed completely. Her eyes narrowed as she looked from the worn leather bag to Zara's simple jeans and t-shirt, then to Mrs. Williams' modest dress and cardigan. "Excuse me," Rebecca called out, her voice sharp enough to make several passengers turn around. "Young lady, you need to check that bag." Zara stopped walking and turned around, confused. "I'm sorry." "That bag," Rebecca said, pointing at the messenger bag like it was something unpleasant. "It's too large for carry-on. You'll need to check it at the gate." Mrs. Williams stepped forward, her voice calm and polite. "I'm sorry, but we measured the bag before we left home. It fits perfectly under the seat, and it meets all the size requirements listed on your website." Rebecca's smile was cold and fake. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I know what fits and what doesn't. That bag is clearly oversized, and frankly, it looks like it's seen better days. We maintain certain standards in first class." Zara felt her face get hot. She hugged the bag tighter against her chest. "It's not too big," she said quietly. "I carry it to school every day, and it fits in the overhead bins on buses just fine. School buses are different from airplanes." "Sweetheart?" Rebecca said in a condescending tone that made the word sweetheart sound like an insult. "And I'm sure the rules are different in whatever school district you attend." Other passengers were starting to stare now. The man with the expensive suit looked annoyed that the boarding process had stopped. The woman with the designer handbag was openly staring at Zara's bag and shaking her head disapprovingly. Mrs. Williams reached into her purse and pulled out their boarding passes. "Here are our tickets. We're in seats 2A and 2B. We paid for first class and we followed all the baggage requirements." Rebecca glanced at the tickets with obvious surprise. "How did you afford first-class tickets?" she asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like something ugly and uncomfortable. Mrs. Williams straightened her shoulders. "I don't see how that's relevant to whether my granddaughter's bag meets your size requirements. It's relevant because I need to make sure these tickets are legitimate. Rebecca replied. "We've had issues with people trying to upgrade themselves or use tickets they're not authorized to use." Zara felt like everyone in the plane was staring at them now. Her eyes started to water, but she refused to cry. Her father had always told her to stand up for herself, to be proud of who she was and where she came from. But right now she just felt small and embarrassed. "Our tickets are legitimate," Mrs. Williams said firmly. "We bought them 3 weeks ago through your website. I have the confirmation email on my phone if you need to see it." Rebecca barely glanced at the phone when Mrs. Williams held it out. "That could be fake," she said dismissively. "These days people can Photoshop anything. I'm going to need to call my supervisor to verify these tickets, and in the meantime, that bag needs to be checked." "No," Zara said suddenly, surprising herself with how loud her voice sounded. "This bag belonged to my father. I'm not checking it." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "Look, I understand you're attached to your little school bag, but this is an airplane, not a classroom. We have rules for a reason, and I'm not making exceptions just because you have some sentimental attachment to an old piece of luggage." The way she said sentimental attachment made it sound ridiculous and childish. Zara felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She looked around at all the other passengers who were watching this scene unfold, hoping someone would say something to help. But they just stood there, some looking uncomfortable, others looking impatient, and a few nodding along with Rebecca, as if they agreed that Zara and her grandmother didn't belong in first class. Mrs. Williams put her arm around Zara's shoulders. "We're not checking the bag," she said calmly. "It meets your stated size requirements, it contains important personal items, and we have every right to carry it on board." Rebecca's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be patient here, but you're holding up the entire boarding process. Either that bag gets checked or you're going to have to move to economy class where maybe the rules are more flexible." The threat hung in the air between them. Zara looked up at her grandmother, who squeezed her shoulder gently. Neither of them moved toward economy class. Neither of them offered to check the bag. And in that moment, Zara realized that this was about much more than luggage size requirements. This was about respect, dignity, and the right to be treated fairly regardless of how old your bag was or how much money people thought you had. The tension in the airplane cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca's face had turned an angry shade of red, and she was no longer pretending to be polite. Several passengers behind Zara and her grandmother were growing visibly impatient, checking their watches and muttering under their breath about delays. "I've had enough of this," Rebecca announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear her. "You're being deliberately difficult and frankly disruptive. This is exactly the kind of behavior we don't tolerate in first class." Mrs. Williams maintained her composure, though Zara could feel her grandmother's hand trembling slightly on her shoulder. "We are not being disruptive," she said in her calm, dignified voice. "We're simply asking to be treated with the same respect you show other passengers." "Respect has to be earned," Rebecca shot back. "And right now, you're showing complete disrespect for our policies and other passengers' time." A woman sitting in seat 1C spoke up. "Could you please just resolve this quickly? Some of us have connecting flights to catch." Her tone suggested she was clearly on Rebecca's side. Rebecca seized the opportunity. "You see? You're affecting everyone on this plane with your attitude." She turned to address the other passengers directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. Some people just don't understand that when you fly with a quality airline, there are certain standards we maintain." Zara felt her face burning with humiliation. The way Rebecca said "some people" made it clear she wasn't just talking about difficult passengers in general. There was something else in her voice, something that made Zara's stomach twist with a feeling she had experienced before but couldn't quite name. "What standards are those exactly?" Mrs. Williams asked pointedly. Rebecca's smile was cold and calculating. "Standards of dress, behavior, and yes, appropriate luggage. This is first class, not a community center. We expect our passengers to understand the difference." The man in the expensive suit finally spoke up. "Look, just put them in economy where they probably belong anyway." Problem solved. Several passengers murmured in agreement. Zara felt like the walls of the plane were closing in around her. She hugged her father's bag even tighter, remembering how he used to tell her that bullies only had power if you let them see you were afraid. "We belong exactly where our tickets say we belong," Zara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And my bag fits under the seat just like the website says it should." Rebecca laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. Sweetheart, I think you're confused about how things work up here. This isn't like wherever you usually fly. We have standards. What's that supposed to mean? Mrs. Williams asked, her voice carrying a warning that Rebecca completely missed. It means that maybe you should consider whether first class is really the right fit for your family, Rebecca replied. There are plenty of seats in economy where you might feel more comfortable. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Zara had heard this kind of language before, at school, at the mall, in restaurants where waiters would seat them in the back corner and take forever to bring the check. It was the way people talked when they wanted to say something cruel without actually saying the words. Are you suggesting we don't belong in first class because of how we look? Mrs. Williams asked directly. Rebecca's eyes widened in mock innocence. I'm not suggesting anything about how you look. I'm talking about your behavior and your inappropriate luggage. Don't try to make this about something it's not. But everyone in the cabin knew exactly what it was about. Some passengers looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. Others nodded approvingly at Rebecca's words. A few took out their phones and started recording, though Zara couldn't tell if they were documenting the discrimination or hoping to catch her family doing something wrong. I want to speak to your supervisor, Mrs. Williams said firmly. My supervisor is busy preparing for takeoff, Rebecca replied dismissively, and frankly, calling my supervisor isn't going to change our baggage policies or make that ratty old bag any more appropriate for first class. The word ratty hit Zara like a physical blow. Her father's bag wasn't ratty. It was loved. It was worn smooth by years of carrying his dreams, his work, his hopes for his daughter's future. Every scuff mark had a story. Every worn spot showed how much it had mattered to him. Don't call it that, Zara whispered, tears finally starting to fall despite her efforts to hold them back. Rebecca's expression softened into fake sympathy. Oh, honey, I understand you're upset. But sometimes we have to learn that our childhood treasures aren't appropriate for adult situations. Maybe it's time to grow up and get a proper bag. Mrs. Williams stepped forward, and for a moment Zara thought her grandmother might actually lose her temper. But Mrs. Williams had been dealing with people like Rebecca her entire life. She knew how to stay strong when others wanted to see her break. This bag belonged to my granddaughter's father, who passed away when she was 12. Mrs. Williams said quietly, It's not just luggage to us. It's a memory. It's a connection. And it meets every single requirement on your website for carry-on items. Some of the passengers who had been nodding along with Rebecca suddenly looked uncomfortable. A few started studying their phones or looking out the windows. But Rebecca wasn't moved at all. That's a very sad story, she said in a tone that suggested she didn't find it sad at all. But I can't make exceptions to airline policy based on every passenger's personal sob story. If I did that, we'd have people bringing all kinds of inappropriate items on board and claiming they had sentimental value. The cruelty of calling her father's death a sob story took Zara's breath away. She looked around the cabin at all these adults who were just sitting there, letting this happen. How could they listen to someone be so deliberately mean and just watch? I'm calling security, Rebecca announced, reaching for the phone mounted on the cabin wall. This has gone on long enough. Security? Mrs. Williams asked. For what? For refusing to follow crew instructions and causing a disturbance, Rebecca replied, already dialing. And for suspicious behavior regarding your ticket validity. A businessman in seat 3A finally spoke up. Come on, this is getting ridiculous. Their tickets are clearly real and that bag isn't bothering anyone. Rebecca whirled around to face him. Sir, I appreciate your input, but I'm trained to recognize potential security threats and disruptive behavior. These passengers are being uncooperative and argumentative. We're being argumentative because you're treating us unfairly, Zara said, her voice cracking with emotion and anger. There's that attitude again, Rebecca said triumphantly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. In first class, we expect a certain level of respect and decorum. The security officer who appeared at the front of the plane was a tired-looking man who clearly didn't want to be there. What seems to be the problem? He asked. Rebecca immediately launched into her version of events. These passengers are refusing to follow baggage policies. They're being disruptive to other travelers, and I have concerns about the validity of their tickets. The security officer looked at Mrs. Williams and Zara, then at the bag Zara was holding. Ma'am, can I see your boarding passes? Mrs. Williams handed over their tickets without hesitation. The officer examined them carefully. then looked up with a confused expression. "These look legitimate to me. What's the issue with the bag?" "It's oversized and inappropriate for first class," Rebecca insisted. The security officer looked at the bag again. It was clearly within normal size limits. "Ma'am, this bag looks fine to me." "It's smaller than half the carry-ons I see every day." Rebecca's face flushed even redder. "It's not just about size. It's about maintaining standards and dealing with passengers who refuse to cooperate." The security officer looked around the cabin at all the watching passengers, then back at Zara and Mrs. Williams. Zara could see him trying to figure out what was really going on here. She hoped he would see through Rebecca's lies and stand up for what was right. But before he could say anything else, footsteps echoed from the jetway, and someone new was boarding the plane. The sound of confident footsteps echoed from the jetway as everyone in the cabin turned to see who was boarding during what had become a very public confrontation. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit appeared at the entrance of the plane, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and he wore the kind of expensive watch that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. He paused just inside the aircraft door, his intelligent brown eyes quickly taking in the scene before him. There was Rebecca, red-faced and gesturing wildly. There was the security officer looking confused and uncomfortable. And there, in the middle of it all, stood a young girl clutching an old leather bag, while her grandmother held her shoulders protectively. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something flickered across his face, so brief that most people would have missed it. But Zara saw it, and for just a moment, she thought she recognized something familiar in his eyes. "I apologize for the delay," the man said in a calm, authoritative voice that seemed to fill the entire cabin. "I was held up in a last-minute meeting." Rebecca barely glanced at him, too caught up in her power trip to notice much beyond her own drama. "Sir, you'll need to take your seat. We're dealing with a security situation here." The man nodded politely. "Of course. What seems to be the problem?" Rebecca launched into her well-rehearsed speech with renewed energy, apparently thinking she had found another ally. "These passengers are refusing to follow airline policies. They're being disruptive, argumentative, and frankly, I'm not convinced their first-class tickets are legitimate. Some people just don't understand that flying first class comes with certain expectations." As Rebecca spoke, the man's eyes moved slowly from her to Mrs. Williams, then to Zara. When his gaze settled on the leather messenger bag, his expression became very still. Very quiet, like the moment before thunder follows lightning. "I see," he said softly. "And what specific policy are they violating?" Rebecca gestured dismissively at Zara's bag. "Oversized luggage, inappropriate for first class. I've explained multiple times that we have standards to maintain." The man stepped closer, and now Zara could see him clearly. There was something about the way he moved, the way he held himself, that seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "May I take a look at this allegedly oversized bag?" he asked. Rebecca waved her hand impatiently. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a crew matter. I've been doing this job for 8 years, and I know policy violations when I see them." "I'm sure you do," the man replied, his voice still calm but carrying an undertone that made several passengers look up from their phones. "But I'd still like to see this bag that's causing such a disturbance." He turned to Zara with a gentle expression that was completely different from the way Rebecca had been looking at her. "May I?" he asked softly. Zara hesitated, then held out the bag so he could see it properly. He examined it carefully, checking its dimensions, running his fingers along the worn leather with surprising gentleness. "This is a beautiful bag," he said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Classic design, well made. Looks like it has some history to it." "It was my father's," Zara whispered. The man's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. Kindness. Understanding. And something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "It must be very special to you," he said. Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. We can't make exceptions for every sob story. This is business class, not a therapy session." The man slowly turned to face Rebecca, and several passengers later swore they felt the temperature in the cabin drop by 10 degrees. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was steel underneath it now. Did you just call this young woman's deceased father a sob story? Rebecca suddenly seemed to realize that this wasn't just another passenger supporting her position. There was something about the way he stood, the way he spoke, that commanded attention. I'm just trying to enforce policies. What's your name? The man asked. Rebecca Martinez. I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. Rebecca Martinez, he repeated, as if filing the information away for later use. And you've determined that this bag violates carry-on size restrictions? Yes, Rebecca said, though she sounded less confident than she had moments before. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a small measuring tape. Would you mind if I verified those measurements? Rebecca looked confused. Sir, who are you exactly? Passengers aren't allowed to. Please, he interrupted gently. Just humor me. He proceeded to measure Zara's bag carefully, calling out each dimension loud enough for everyone to hear. Length, width, height. Every measurement fell well within the airline's published carry-on limits. Interesting, he said, putting the measuring tape away. According to these measurements, this bag is actually smaller than the standard carry-on size. In fact, it would fit easily in your sizing box at the gate. Rebecca's face was now an alarming shade of purple. Size isn't everything. There are other factors. Appropriateness, standards. What standards would those be? The man asked. Well, first-class passengers expect a certain ambiance. Other passengers have complained. The man looked around the cabin. Which passengers complained about this young woman's bag? Silence. Not a single person raised their hand or spoke up. In fact, several passengers were now looking distinctly uncomfortable, as if they were realizing they had witnessed something they shouldn't have supported. So no one complained about the bag, the man said slowly, and the bag meets all size requirements. Yet you've called security, disrupted the boarding process, and made this family feel unwelcome. Is that correct? Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. The security officer, who had been watching this exchange with growing interest, stepped forward. Ma'am, he said to Rebecca, I've examined their tickets and their luggage. Everything appears to be in order. I don't see any security issue here. But they were being argumentative and they were defending themselves, the man said quietly. Wouldn't you be argumentative if someone was treating you unfairly in front of a plane full of strangers? Mrs. Williams had been watching this entire exchange with a mixture of hope and caution. She had seen too many situations where someone seemed to be helping, only to disappoint her in the end. But there was something about this man that felt different. Sir, she said carefully, we appreciate your support, but we don't want to cause any more trouble. The man turned to her with a sad smile. Ma'am, you haven't caused any trouble at all, and you won't be causing any trouble by taking your seats and enjoying your flight. He looked back at Rebecca, who was now noticeably sweating despite the cool cabin air. Unless there are any other policy violations you'd like to discuss? Rebecca shook her head mutely. Excellent, the man said. Then I suggest we all take our seats so this flight can depart on time. As if released from a spell, passengers began moving toward their seats, the boarding process resuming its normal flow. The security officer gave a polite nod and headed back toward the gate. But Rebecca remained frozen in place, staring at the man who had just dismantled her entire performance. Zara and her grandmother started toward their seats, but the man gently touched Mrs. Williams' arm. Excuse me, he said quietly so only they could hear. Would it be possible to speak with you privately once we're in the air? I believe we may have some things to discuss. Mrs. Williams looked puzzled. I'm sorry, do we know each other? The man's smile was gentle and complicated. In a way, yes, but we'll have plenty of time to talk during the flight. As they settled into their seats, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. There was something about the way the man had looked at her, something about the careful way he had handled her father's bag, that suggested he knew more about their situation than a random passenger should. 20 minutes into the flight, after the seatbelt sign had been turned off and the cabin service had begun, the man from the boarding incident made his way down the aisle toward Zara and her grandmother. He moved with quiet purpose, nodding politely to other passengers but clearly focused on reaching seats 2A and 2B. Mrs. Williams looked up from her magazine as he approached. Is everything all right, sir? I hope we're not in your seat or anything. The man smiled, and up close, Zara could see laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. despite the serious expression he had worn during the confrontation with Rebecca. "No, nothing like that. I was wondering if I might sit with you for a few minutes. There's something important I need to tell you both." He gestured to the empty seat across the aisle. "May I?" Mrs. Williams nodded, though she still looked puzzled. "Of course." As he settled into the seat, Zara noticed that Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. Another flight attendant, a kind-looking older woman, was handling the first-class service. The man seemed to notice her looking around. "Ms. Martinez has been reassigned to other duties for the remainder of this flight," he said simply. "How do you know her last name?" Zara asked. "And how were you able to do that?" The man was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. But first I owe you both an apology." Mrs. Williams frowned. "An apology for what?" "You're the one who helped us. I'm apologizing because what happened to you should never happen to anyone, especially not on one of our aircraft." The word "our" hung in the air between them. Mrs. Williams and Zara exchanged glances. "Our?" Mrs. Williams repeated slowly. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Mrs. Williams. She read it, and her eyes widened. She showed it to Zara, who felt her breath catch in her throat. The card read, "David Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Skyline Airlines." "You're the CEO?" Zara whispered. David nodded. "I am. And I want you both to know that what you experienced today goes against everything this company claims to stand for." Mrs. Williams stared at the business card, then back at David. "I don't understand. What are you doing on this flight? Don't CEOs have private jets or something?" David chuckled. "Sometimes I do fly privately, but I make it a point to take regular commercial flights on our airline at least twice a month. It's the only way to really know what our customers experience. Today, I got to see firsthand how one of our employees treats passengers, and frankly, I'm horrified." Zara found her voice. "So when Rebecca was treating us badly, you knew the whole time that you could stop it?" "I suspected something was wrong from the moment I boarded and saw the commotion," David said carefully. "But I wanted to observe how the situation was being handled before I intervened. I needed to see exactly what kind of treatment you were receiving and why." Mrs. Williams leaned back in her seat, processing this information. "You were testing your own employee?" "In a way, yes. Though I certainly didn't expect it to go as far as it did, or to be as blatantly inappropriate as it was." David's expression darkened. Calling your family's story about Zara's father a sob story was unforgivable. "What happens to Rebecca now?" Zara asked. David was quiet for a moment. "That depends on several factors. Her behavior today will trigger a full investigation into her employment history with us. We'll review other complaints, interview her colleagues, and examine how she's treated other passengers in similar situations." "Similar situations?" Mrs. Williams asked pointedly. "Situations where passengers don't fit someone's narrow idea of who belongs in first class," David said bluntly. "I suspect today wasn't the first time Rebecca has made assumptions about passengers based on appearance, age, or economic status." Zara hugged her father's bag closer to her chest. "She kept saying we didn't belong in first class, like we weren't good enough or something." David's jaw tightened. "No one has the right to make you feel that way, especially not an employee of this airline. Every passenger who buys a ticket deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of what they're wearing, what kind of bag they carry, or what assumptions people make about their background." Mrs. Williams looked at him thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something personal, Mr. Chen?" "David, please." "And yes, you seem to know something about Zara's bag. The way you looked at it, the way you handled it. That wasn't just a CEO checking company policy compliance." David was quiet for so long that Zara wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more personal to you. "And before, I lost my father when I was about Zara's age," he said. "He was an immigrant, worked 2 jobs to support our family, and he carried an old briefcase everywhere he went. It was worn and patched, and I used to be embarrassed by it when he'd drop me off at school." Zara felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "After he died, that briefcase became the most precious thing I owned," David continued. "I carried it through high school, college, my first job. People made comments sometimes, told me I needed to get something more professional, more appropriate for someone trying to succeed in business." "What did you do?" Zara asked quietly. "I kept carrying it," David said with a small smile, "until one day it literally fell apart from wear. But by then I didn't need it anymore. I had learned that success isn't about having the right accessories or looking like everyone else expects you to look. It's about carrying forward the values and dreams of the people who loved us. Mrs. Williams wiped her eyes with a tissue. That's a beautiful story. It's why what happened to you today made me so angry, David said. Rebecca wasn't just enforcing baggage policy. She was attacking something sacred, something that connects you to someone you love. The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching clouds drift past the window. What happens now? Mrs. Williams asked. I mean, beyond what happens to Rebecca. David straightened up and Zara could see him shifting from the personal conversation back into CEO mode. Several things. First, I'm going to personally review our training programs for customer service and anti-discrimination policies. What happened today suggests we have some serious gaps that need to be addressed. He pulled out a notebook and started writing. Second, I'm going to institute a new policy requiring all customer-facing employees to complete enhanced sensitivity training every 6 months, not just when they're hired. Will that really make a difference? Zara asked skeptically. People like Rebecca might just learn to hide their attitudes better. David looked impressed by her insight. You're absolutely right. Training alone isn't enough. That's why we're also going to start doing undercover assessments, where people pose as passengers to test how our employees treat different types of customers. Mrs. Williams nodded approvingly. Like secret shoppers. Exactly. And any employee found discriminating against passengers for any reason will face immediate consequences, up to and including termination. Zara thought about this. What about passengers who discriminate against other passengers? Some of the people on this plane were agreeing with Rebecca. That's harder to control, David admitted. We can't police every passenger's thoughts or attitudes. But we can make sure our employees set the right tone and never tolerate or encourage discriminatory behavior. He closed his notebook and looked at both of them seriously. I also want to offer you something beyond just policy changes and apologies. Mrs. Williams raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? A formal partnership, David said. I'd like to invite you both to work with our company as consultants on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Help us understand what it really feels like to be a customer who doesn't fit traditional assumptions, and guide us toward better practices. Zara's eyes widened. You want us to help run your company? David laughed. Not run it, but definitely help improve it. What do you think? Mrs. Williams and Zara looked at each other, then back at David. For the first time since boarding the plane, Zara felt like something good might come out of this terrible experience. 6 months later, Zara stood in the conference room on the 42nd floor of Skyline Airline's headquarters, looking out at the Chicago skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She still carried her father's leather messenger bag, but now it was filled with reports, presentation notes, and feedback from passengers who had experienced discrimination on flights across the country. Are you ready for this? Her grandmother asked, adjusting her own professional blazer. Mrs. Williams had taken to her role as a diversity consultant with surprising enthusiasm, bringing decades of wisdom about navigating unfair treatment to a company that desperately needed to hear her insights. Zara nodded, though her stomach was full of butterflies. Today they were presenting their 6-month review to the entire executive board, including David, who had become not just their employer, but something like family over the past half year. The conference room began filling with executives, department heads, and senior managers. Zara recognized most of them now, having worked with different teams throughout the company. Some had been skeptical when David first announced his new diversity initiative, but the results spoke for themselves. David entered the room last, carrying his own worn briefcase that he had started using again after their conversation on the plane. He gave Zara and Mrs. Williams an encouraging smile before taking his seat at the head of the long conference table. Ladies and gentlemen, David began, 6 months ago, I witnessed an incident on one of our flights that fundamentally changed how I think about our company's values and practices. Today, Mrs. Williams and Zara are here to share what they've learned from working with us to address those issues. Mrs. Williams stood first, projecting a confidence that would have amazed anyone who had seen her being intimidated by Rebecca 6 months earlier. When we started this project, many of you wondered if discrimination was really a widespread problem or just an isolated incident. I'm here to tell you that in 6 months we've documented over 300 cases of passengers being treated unfairly because of their appearance, age, race, or economic status. A murmur went around the room. Even David looked surprised by the number. However, Mrs. Williams continued, we've also seen remarkable changes. Employee complaints about discrimination have dropped by 70% since we implemented the new training program. Customer satisfaction scores have improved across all demographics. And our undercover assessment program has identified and addressed problems before they escalated to the level of what my granddaughter and I experienced. She gestured to Zara, who stood up with her presentation remote in hand. Zara has been working specifically with our younger employees and our social media response team. I'll let her share what she's discovered. Zara clicked to her first slide, which showed before and after screenshots of social media posts about Skyline Airlines. 6 months ago, we were getting complaints every week about flight attendants and gate agents making passengers feel unwelcome. People were posting videos of discriminatory treatment, and those videos were getting millions of views. She clicked to the next slide. Now we're seeing posts like this one, where a passenger thanks a flight attendant for helping her elderly mother feel comfortable, or this one, where someone praises a gate agent for being patient with a family whose child has special needs. One of the marketing executives raised her hand. What's driving that change? Accountability, Zara said simply. When employees know they might be evaluated by undercover assessments at any time, they can't afford to have bad days where they take their frustrations out on passengers. But more importantly, we've helped them understand that good customer service isn't just about following rules. It's about seeing every passenger as someone worthy of respect. David leaned forward in his chair. Can you give us a specific example? Zara nodded and clicked to her next slide, which showed a photo of a smiling flight attendant with an elderly passenger. Last month, one of our assessment team sent an elderly gentleman with a walker and an oxygen tank onto a flight from Atlanta to Denver. His appearance suggested he might have financial struggles, and in the past, passengers like him often reported being treated as inconveniences. She paused, making eye contact with several people around the table. Instead, flight attendant Jennifer Rodriguez not only helped him stow his carry-on and adjust his seat, but she checked on him throughout the flight and made sure he had assistance getting off the plane. When our assessor revealed himself and asked why she went above and beyond, she said the new training had taught her that every passenger has a story worth respecting. Mrs. Williams stood back up. That's the culture change we've been working toward. Not just eliminating bad behavior, but encouraging employees to actively look for ways to make every passenger feel valued. The CFO spoke up from across the table. This is all very heartwarming, but what's the business impact? Are we seeing financial returns on this investment? David pulled out his own folder. I'm glad you asked, Tom. Customer retention is up 18%. Our net promoter score has improved by 25 points. And perhaps most importantly, we've avoided what could have been a public relations disaster if videos of the incident with Rebecca had gone viral. Speaking of Rebecca, the head of human resources interjected, can you update us on how that situation was resolved? David's expression became more serious. Rebecca Martinez was terminated after our investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward passengers she perceived as not belonging in premium cabins. We also discovered that 3 other employees had filed complaints about her behavior toward coworkers, complaints that had been inadequately addressed by her supervisors. He looked around the table. This led us to completely overhaul our complaint process and retrain all supervisory staff on RICO. Recognizing and addressing discrimination. Zara clicked to her final slide, which showed a graph tracking various metrics over the 6-month period. The numbers tell the story better than we can. Complaints down, satisfaction up, employee morale improved, and social media sentiment positive. But beyond the statistics, we've helped create an environment where passengers like my grandmother and me know we'll be treated with dignity. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed the presentation. Finally, the head of operations raised his hand. What's next? Where do we go from here? Mrs. Williams and Zara exchanged glances. They had been hoping someone would ask that question. We'd like to expand the program, Mrs. Williams said. Work with other airlines, hotels, and service companies who want to address similar issues. What we've learned here at Skyline could help improve customer experiences across the entire travel industry. David smiled. Actually, we've already had inquiries from 4 other airlines and 2 hotel chains who want to learn about our program. I'd like to propose that we create a consulting division, with Mrs. Williams and Zara leading the effort. Zara felt her heart skip. You want us to teach other companies what we've learned here? I want you to change the entire industry, David said simply. The same way you changed our company. As the meeting ended and executives filed out of the conference room, David approached Zara and her grandmother. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his briefcase. Zara opened it carefully and found a beautiful leather luggage tag with her initials embossed in gold. For your father's bag, David explained, so everyone knows it belongs to someone special. Tears filled Zara's eyes as she attached the tag to her bag. 6 months ago, she had been a teenager being humiliated on an airplane for carrying something precious to her. Now she was a consultant helping a major corporation change its culture, and her father's memory was part of that change. Do you think he would be proud? She asked quietly. Mrs. Williams put her arm around her granddaughter. Baby, I think he would be amazed. You took something terrible that happened to you and turned it into something that's helping thousands of other people. David nodded in agreement. Your father's bag started a conversation that's changing how people treat each other. I'd say that's a pretty powerful legacy. As they packed up their presentation materials and prepared to leave the conference room, Zara looked once more at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there on planes and in airports and hotels, employees were treating customers with more respect because of the work they had done. Passengers who might have felt unwelcome were instead being made to feel valued. Her father's old leather bag had carried his dreams for years. Now it was carrying forward his daughter's mission to make the world a little more fair, one interaction at a time. And that, Zara thought as she slung the bag over her shoulder, was exactly the kind of story her father would have loved to be part of. 6 months ago, Rebecca Martinez had tried to make Zara feel small and unwelcome. Today, Zara was helping to create a world where no passenger would ever have to feel that way again. Sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply refusing to let it win.